As the great philosopher Weezer once said, Beverly Hills, that's where I want to be. Beverly Hills, living like a celebrity. Beverly Hills has become almost mythic in pop culture, a zip code associated with pink stucco palaces, palm-lined boulevards, Ferrari-filled driveways, and an endless parade of reality show starlets and plastic surgeons. It's the land where dog walkers carry designer bags, and the local coffee shop doubles as a paparazzi trap. In other words, it's the kind of place where an empty hilltop lot could plausibly be marketed as the world's first billion-dollar residential listing. And, well, that's exactly what happened. In 2018, a 157-acre swath of undeveloped land, a land almost twice the size of Disneyland, was put on the market for $1 billion. At that price, it eclipsed every private residential listing in history, including homes with mansions and private islands attached. The property, commonly called the Mountain, not to be confused with the Mountain from Game of Thrones, set on one of the highest peaks in Los Angeles County, with views stretching from the San Gabriel Mountains to downtown Los Angeles. The mountain contains 6 legal parcels ranging from 2.7 to 12.2 acres, all protected by a grandfather clause that allows houses up to 48 feet tall, which is 12 feet taller than current Beverly Hill codes permit. Previous owners installed a cobblestone drive, landscaping lights, a sculpture garden with water features, 500 transplanted trees, and more than 5,000 plants. Utilities, an advanced storm drain system, a water retention basin, a fire hydrant booster system, and a generator powerful enough to run a 300,000 square foot complex are already in place. In other words, this empty hilltop was treated like the site of a future palace. Developers, celebrities, and billionaires from Brad Pitt to Jeff Bezos all walked its dusty paths. The mountain's mission was simple: have one person, just one, buy it for the astronomical price of $1 billion. However, despite having Tom Cruise as an interested party, the mountain's mission was impossible. Nobody put down even half the asking price. A year later, in August of 2019, the same tract quietly sold at a foreclosure auction for $100,000. That's right, $100,000. About 1/10,000th of its headline price. A piece of property being sold for an amount of money that's hard to quantify or imagine a single person having, sold for the price of a nice new car. That staggering collapse begs the question: how could a piece of prime Beverly Hills land slash its price so dramatically? Well, to answer, we need to look back over 50 years of ownership through revolutions, bankruptcies, crooked deals, and courtroom battles. Nestled within these transactions is, as surprising as this may sound, the story of a child who was promised the inheritance of wealth and a dream property. The promise of unimaginable wealth came with guardians who withheld his father's belongings, leveraged his memories for negotiations, and insisted that he could make do with IKEA rather than crystal chandeliers. Through the mountain, this child would actually become the subject of tabloid headlines before he understood their meaning. And as we'll come to find out, the mountain would end up representing the moral compromises people make to chase riches. As each owner tried to turn this blank canvas into a monument to their own ambition, they stumbled over political upheavals, financial scandals, and their own flaws. With all that being said, let's take a tour of this billion-dollar mansion and find out how a property built on promises and dreams became nothing more than a patch of dirt. So hello everybody, today we're talking about Beverly Hills' billion-dollar empty lot. This is a story that's so strange, it's hard to understand the premise without knowing the context. But as mentioned, it involves revolutions, inheritances, and a lot of greed, and is a telling example of how when you squeeze your money too tight, it tends to slip from your fingers. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. To tell the origins of the mountain, we have to leave Beverly Hills and go all the way to Tehran. In the early 1970s, Princess Shams Pahlavi, sister to Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of Iran, acquired what Los Angeles real estate agents called the Vineyard. The Vineyard would eventually be known as the Mountain. Princess Pahlavi saw the 157 acres of undeveloped hillside above Benedict Canyon and knew it had to be hers. The Pahlavi family had been amassing international properties through royal privilege and state-controlled oil wealth. For the Shah's sister, this mountaintop was supposed to be a palace away from Iran. It was rumored that many of Shah's foreign assets were hidden in her name, a convenient shelter should politics turn against the monarchy. Well, those politics changed with extraordinary speed. The 1970s had seen the Shah embark on an ambitious white revolution, land reform, infrastructure expansion, and nominal voting rights, funded by Iran's booming oil revenues. But the benefits flowed to a narrow elite while repression intensified. Disparaged groups like Islamists, intellectuals, liberals by Middle East standards, and workers united against a regime they saw as corrupt, Western-controlled, and at times brutally authoritarian. And their grievances had deep roots. In 1953, a CIA and MI6-backed coup toppled Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh and reinstalled the Shah. This sowed resentment that the monarchy was a puppet of foreign powers. While Mossadegh had dissolved parliament and centralized power for himself, he had also nationalized Iran's oil, defending the country from foreign control. Like most things, the conflict is complicated, and the truth will differ according to who you ask. But what matters for this story is that the Shah's reign was complex and not completely supported by all Iranian people. By 1978, mass protest and spontaneous neighborhood committees had made Iran almost ungovernable. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returned from exile to a cheering crowd of millions. 10 days later, the monarchy collapsed, ending nearly 4 decades of Pahlavi rule. What followed for the Pahlavi family was exile and frozen assets. Princess Shams and her mother, Tajo Maloik, found themselves targets of sometimes violent protests in Los Angeles, where Iranian students chanted, "Death to the Shah," and threw Molotov cocktails at the Beverly Hills properties. Wanting protection, the royal family turned to California law enforcement, who advised the royal family to keep moving to evade attacks. Which that's a discouraging point. You ask the police to help, and the police are like, you should probably get out of here. Student activists laid siege to consulates, confronted dignitaries, and leveraged the free speech rights of their host country to wage their revolution abroad. Facing lawsuits from the revolutionary government and an international tribunal seeking to seize family assets, the princess quietly sold the Beverly Hills mountaintop to American game show titan Merv Griffin in 1987 for around $6.5 million. At the time, this sale looked like a simple luxury transfer. In hindsight, it was the opening of a saga that would intertwine global politics with Hollywood ambition. If you grew up hearing the tune of Jeopardy, or shouting at the wheel on Wheel of Fortune, or if you're one of my viewers, heard about your grandparents doing those things, then you owe those hours of family bonding to Merv Griffin. Born in San Francisco in 1925, Griffin started his career as a singer on local radio, eventually landing a hit song, "I've Got a Lovely Bunch of Coconuts," which in the 1920s was probably all the rage. His charm led him to television, where he was a substitute host for The Price is Right and later hosted The Merv Griffin Show, where he interviewed everyone from presidents to pop stars. By the mid-1980s, he was one of the most successful producers in television history. He sold his production company to Columbia Pictures for $250 million and reinvested in real estate. This included a resort in La Quinta, California, and an 18th century estate in Ireland. In 1988, he spent $325 million buying Resorts International in Atlantic City in a takeover battle between him and Donald Trump. His appetite for risky deals extended beyond game shows. When Griffin bought the mountain in 1987, he imagined a 58,000 square foot Paladin Palace to outshine producer Aaron Spelling's 56,000 square foot Candyland mansion just down the hill. Because if you're that rich, you're not going to give it all away. I guess you get into mansion fights with your neighbors. Spelling's home, later dubbed The Manor, boasted 123 rooms, a bowling alley, and a full-size screening room. Again, I like the idea of someone having this much money and designing a house with 122 rooms and then going, I think it's missing something. The arms race among producers to build bigger mansions was a tabloid obsession. Griffin told the Los Angeles Times he wanted helipads, lakes, and marble columns, quote, like those Palladio-style houses you see outside Venice, but with glass walls to capture the views. He enlisted designer Waldo Fernandez to draw up marble and limestone plans and boasted to reporters about, quote, slicing the top of a mountain. Again, these sound like awesome, very humble people. Griffin's biggest contribution wasn't building a house, it was reconfiguring the mountain itself. He ordered massive grading work to level the top, moving roughly 2 million cubic yards of dirt and shaping 14 acres. This engineering feat required about 100 tons of equipment and cost millions. It also proved fatal for one worker when a scraper flipped down the hillside. Griffin also installed infrastructure, which included paved roads, drainage, water retention basins, and a cobblestone drive, lit with landscape lights. He planted hundreds of trees and thousands of shrubs. The property now had the skeleton of a small village, ready to host either one colossal estate or 6 separated mansions. Griffin planned to donate over 100 acres to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy if his subdivision was approved. The Conservancy's mission is to create interconnected parks and wildlife corridors across Southern California, preserving biodiversity amid sprawl. By giving land to the Conservancy, Griffin could develop 6 lots while burnishing his environmental credentials. But Los Angeles city codes required a secondary road to ensure fire department access, a cost he deemed prohibitive. The late 1980s also saw a real estate downturn. So with these things in combination, in the late 1980s, Griffin listed the property for sale for $25 million. He would drop it to $11.5 million and finally sold it in 1997 to Herbalife founder Mark Hughes for $8.5 million. So now we move on to the property's next owner. Mark Reynolds Hughes was a high school dropout born in 1956 in Linwood, California. He grew up watching his mother struggle with weight and diet drugs. As a young man, he joined a weight loss company called Cypher's Laboratories, but left when he became disillusioned with its products. In 1980, Hughes started selling his own meal replacement shakes out of the trunk of his car. He called his company Herbalife and promised customers they could, quote, lose weight now, ask me how. His genius, however, wasn't nutrition science. It was recruiting. He built Herbalife as a multi-level marketing company where distributors earn commissions not just on their sales, but on those they recruited. A visionary for decades of supplements sold on TikTok Live. By the mid-1990s, Herbalife had expanded into Japan, Spain, New Zealand, and Israel, posting $700 million in annual retail sales. Hughes became a billionaire on paper and cultivated a playboy image with lavish homes, yachts, and celebrity friends. Hughes' meteoric rise carried the contradictions of his era. As he got rich, he leaned into conspicuous consumption and surrounded himself with celebrities and politicians. The same instinct that made him a recruiting genius also drove him to build ever more extravagant homes. His plans for the mountain mirrored his previous purchases. He did not simply want a comfortable family residence, he envisioned a 45,000 square foot Mediterranean villa with a 1-million-gallon pond and wildlife sanctuary. How even big is 1,000,000 gallons? It's got to be too big, right? He hired star architect Richard Mayer to draw the plans and bragged about bringing Venice's Palladio aesthetic to Beverly Hills. But his company, Herbalife, had a rise that was dogged by allegations of false health claims and pyramid scheme tactics. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration began receiving complaints of nausea, diarrhea, and headaches linked to Herbalife as early as 1981. Herbalife's official career book prompted products like Herbalife Aloe Drink as cures for stomach and bowel ulcerations, and Formula No. 2 as a remedy for 75 ailments ranging from age spots to cancer. So, the kind of things you just can't say about product you're selling. In the summer of 1982, the FDA forced Herbalife to remove unsafe ingredients like mandrake and poke root and to modify its claims. Later that year, Canadian authorities filed 24 criminal charges against Herbalife of Canada, not Hughes personally, for false medical claims and misleading advertising. The negative publicity intensified when the U.S. Senate hearings in 1985 investigated whether Herbalife was an illegal endless chain scheme, and some allegations even linked their products to deaths. Hughes struck back in public, accusing regulators of overreach. But domestic sales faltered, so he expanded aggressively overseas. Herbalife went public in 1986 via a reverse merger with the Utah Shell Company, allowing Hughes to cash in millions. By 1991, international sales had climbed to $191 million, while U.S. sales dropped to $42 million. Reflecting both regulatory pressure and market saturation. Hughes repositioned the company as a wellness lifestyle brand and kept recruiting distributors. Hughes' personal life was as dramatic as his business. For starters, he married 4 times, which I imagine is below average in Beverly Hills. His third wife, Susan Schroeder, a certified court reporter and former Miss Petite USA, gave birth to his son, Alexander, in 1992. Hughes lavished Susan and Alex with a lavish lifestyle. including expensive summer rentals of a beach house in Malibu and trips on his yacht. Progress on the mountain halted as his marriage fractured and his attention shifted. He divorced Susan in 1998 and married model Darcy Lapierre in 1999 and purchased a coastal mansion in Malibu, California instead. As you've probably put together, Hughes's impulsive changes in wives and properties should be enough to show how addicted he was to novelty. He treated real estate, and arguably some of his relationships, like trophies, and the mountain was meant to be his ultimate trophy. But like many of his projects, he left it unfinished. By May 20th, 2000, Hughes collapsed at his grandmother's birthday party. He died the next day from a toxic mix of alcohol and the antidepressant doxepin. He was only 44 years old. The Los Angeles coroner ruled it accidental, though some conspiracy theories persist due to his legal battles. In 2016, over a decade after Hughes' death, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission forced Herbalife to pay $200 million in refunds to consumers for deceptive earning claims. The FTC found that half of Herbalife's sales leaders earned an average of $5 a month, a stark contrast to the company's promises of wealth. Critics like John Oliver have since lampooned Herbalife as a pyramid scheme disguised as nutrition. Hughes' sudden death left the mountain in limbo. Per his estate plan, the property was placed into the Mark Hughes Family Trust for his son's benefit. Specifically, Hughes' trust stipulated that Alex would inherit everything on his 35th birthday. Until then, the assets, including the mountain, were controlled by trustees. Hughes' father, Jack Reynolds, Herbalife Vice President Christopher Pear, and Hughes' attorney, Conrad Klein. Hughes' ex-wife Susan, now Alex's only guardian, as you can imagine, quickly clashed with these three. And to be completely in her defense, that is a very stupid rule. He's like, yeah, if I ever die, everything will go to my son, but he has to be 35. And if he's not 35, then it will go to my attorney and the vice president, and also my dad, who's older than me. And I'm sure those three will make sure it's all in place and nothing bad will happen to any of it. I understand the whole picking an age for a kid to inherit a fortune thing, because you don't want the kid to immediately be spoiled or have a ton of money they blow when they're 17 or anything. But 35? I mean, 21 would be more than old enough. Maybe 25, but 35? This guy has hundreds of millions of dollars waiting on him, but he's got to drop out of college and work at Walmart for a decade before he can see any of it. I'm sure it's because Hughes didn't expect to be gone until his son was at least 35, but that's the whole point of a will, right? What if the thing we don't want to happen happens? Anyway, Susan accused the trustees of mismanaging funds, denying her request for expenses, and blocking her from accessing sentimental items. Susan said the trust was supposed to maintain Alex's lavish lifestyle, not downgrade it. Court papers reveal requests for Mark's golf clubs, his favorite t-shirt, and decorative pillows were all met with "Sue us." When she asked for a 2-month summer rental of a beach house in Malibu, a vacation meant to preserve Alex's accustomed lifestyle, what he was used to when Dad was alive, the trustees offered half the money and suggested that she be nice to them. So, the purpose of this trust is so Alex can maintain his lavish lifestyle, right? So when Alex's mom goes to get the money for a vacation they would go on every year, the people who Hughes put in charge of the money gives her half. It's like, well, maybe, we'll take care of his son, who this money is set to go to. Maybe we'll take care of him if you say please next time. In one alleged incident, trustee Christopher Pear propositioned her sexually in exchange for funds. Again, big allegedly. While Pear denied the allegations, the court acknowledged his conduct was, quote, grossly inappropriate. I know Hughes is like the prototype case for, someone goes from nothing to something and then they have all this money and then it's more than they know what to do with and then they crash out. But maybe don't leave your son's inheritance to people who are evil. Again, allegedly. The trustees argued they were protecting a child from ruin. They consulted a psychiatrist and rabbi about the harmful impact of the wealth. I understand the psychiatrist a bit, to come and be like, hey, a lot of money for a kid can be bad, but what's the rabbi going to do? Be like, yeah, don't do it. A lawyer for the trustees asked rhetorically whether a child needed a chandelier or could be content with something from IKEA. Yet critics note the trustees paid themselves $10 million in fees and spent $22.6 million on litigation. Between lawsuits, depositions, and tabloid coverage, Alex grew up under public scrutiny and quickly became known as America's richest teenager. The legal battle did more than drain the trust. It exposed a deeply personal war over memory and control. The trustees who claimed to be protecting Alex's wealth withheld sentimental items and used access to funds as leverage. The power imbalance was stark. A woman and child were dependent on men who treated their generosity as a bargaining chip. Reporters chronicled each court filing, fueling gossip about whether Alex would grow up spoiled or deprived. Within this fishbowl, he learned to distrust adults who claimed to act in his interest. Susan believed that Alex's father wanted the mountain preserved for Alex and was willing to spend about $250,000 a year to maintain it. She argued that Mark had envisioned a single, sprawling estate ringed by protected open space. To her, spending $250,000 annually on maintenance was a small price to keep alive her late husband's dream. She saw the property as a living memorial where Alex could feel his father's presence. Susan's preservationist stance also tapped into broader environmental and civic concerns. As noted earlier, when Merv Griffin tried to subdivide the land, he planned to donate 104 acres to the Santa Monica Mountains Conservancy, whose mission is to preserve and enhance public open space. Residents excited by that idea still yearned for more accessible green space in Beverly Hills. Citing that precedent, Susan argued that the trust could pursue a community-oriented solution rather than break the mountain into gated lots. The trustees dismissed her as sentimental, but a growing movement of activists later advocated for converting the mountain into parkland. The irony is that had the trustees listened, the family might have preserved both the land's value and their reputations. While lawyers and trustees sparred over appraisals and maintenance budgets, Alex grew up learning that every request, from renting a beach house to retrieving his father's golf clubs, was ammunition in a power struggle. He was paraded in the press as the heir to a fortune he could not touch until his 35th birthday. Between the ages of 8 and 18, he sat in on depositions and overheard adults argue whether a child deserved a chandelier or an IKEA lamp. And again, the trustees were hiring psychiatrists and rabbis, yet they paid themselves millions in fees and blocked requests for sentimental items. However, the trustees saw an opportunity to turn the raw land into a profitable development. They obtained a tentative tract map allowing 6 homes, but needed capital and know-how to pursue it. Because they were trustees, they couldn't directly develop the property. What they needed was a middleman, someone who could navigate city planning and raise funds while allowing them to keep their hands clean. See, the trustees are just supposed to hold on to it and manage the funds until Alex is 35. But now they're trying to find loopholes to make money and build developments on the land and try to sell off pieces of it, but they can't do it directly, so they've got to find a guy who can create a loophole so they can profit off of the stuff that's supposed to be Alex's from his late father. Again, see the thing I said earlier about being evil. So enter Charles Chip Dickens, his name was Charles Dickens, who approached the trust with an audacious proposal. In August of 2003, a 6'1" man with a graying mustache strolled into Conrad Klein's office. Klein again was Mark Hughes' attorney. He introduced himself as Charles Dickens, but everyone called him Chip, again not to be confused with the actual Charles Dickens. Dickens hailed from Atlanta and had bounced between ventures ranging from car dealerships to small-town developments. He had cultivated connections to wealthy investors in Chicago and presented himself as a charismatic dealmaker. Chip had been sent by a group of investors to evaluate a, quote, fantastic Beverly Hills property. They were looking at a $20 million deal that would require a $2 million deposit. When those investors failed to come up with the deposit, the deal died. Undeterred, Chip returned to Klein and pleaded for the mountain. Quote, I want you to give it to me. Let me finish the tract map and buy the property. So Klein and the other trustees viewed Dickens as their proxy. They leased the mountain to him for $0 and lent him $1.5 million to complete a tract map. See, legally, whenever land is to be subdivided, you have to provide a tract map of the different sections of land that show buyers and the county where the different divisions of land are. Without that document, the option to subdivide more than one house would have expired, slashing the land's value. So if the trustees want to keep the land up, they have to have Dickens come in and complete the tract map, but they can't directly have him do that because they're just supposed to be managing the property. But if they lease it to him, which they are able to do for some reason, then it's as if it's his land and they conveniently loan him the amount of money needed to complete the tract map. Once the map was done in 2004, they lent him another $23.75 million so he could buy the property using only trust money. with no down payment of his own. Court records show a rival bidder offered $25.75 million, but Klein stuck with Dickens even though he lacked the money or experience of a serious developer. A Los Angeles judge later called the sale a, quote, gross breach of trust, arguing that trustees were gifting a 157-acre asset. Dickens admits, quote, I could sit with Klein for hours. I did my MBA sitting at Conrad's feet. Which is just kind of a weird, what kind of relationship do they have? Now I'm doubly suspicious. In other words, an inexperienced operator learned on the job with trust assets. Again, a trust that is supposed to be for Alex. The trustees rationalized the deal by saying the property's value always exceeded the loans, but critics saw it as an insider's gamble with Alex Hughes' inheritance. Again, the people managing Alex's trust can't do anything with the land except manage it, so they can sell it to this guy with money they gave him out of Alex's trust, because it's clearly a backdoor scheme for them to develop the land, and then when this developer sells it back to them, it'll be worth way more and it'll have 6 tracts of land and they can sell it for a lot and then collect their fees from it. Once Dickens controlled the mountain, because again, legally, even though the money came from the trust, Dickens now owns it, he began courting ultra-rich buyers. Offers climbed from $34 million to $74 million. At one point, a buyer offered $103 million, but Klein told Dickens, quote, if he'll pay $103 million, he'll pay $107 million, and the deal evaporated. Which, no, Klein, that's not how it works. If he'll pay $103 million, maybe he'll just pay $103 million. Also, you've got 6 pieces of land and someone's trying to buy it for $103 and you need another 4 out of them? Is this guy like just trying to break a record or something? That's stupid. Dickens and Klein turned down offer after offer, convinced that each bid just set a higher floor. Real estate broker Jeff Hyland recalled getting offers of $50 million per lot. Dickens would respond with a folksy, giddy up as the numbers rose. What? Between Dickens earlier saying that he got his MBA, or in other words, he learned about business at the feet of Klein, and here, anytime the numbers go up, he would go, giddy up. Why are all these people so weird? The debt-financed expansions eventually collapsed. Shocker. By 2008, Tower Park Properties, the company Dickens formed to hold and develop the mountain, defaulted on loans and filed for bankruptcy. It's almost like they were burning through money to develop all this, and if you don't sell any of it, that's a bad thing. They emerged in 2010, still owning the mountain, but carrying heavy debt. In 2009, Alex Hughes, now 18, took matters into his own hands. He hired independent lawyers and successfully petitioned to remove Klein and the other trustees. As mentioned, the court called Klein's management of the trust a gross breach of trust, forcing him out. So with attorneys, Alex successfully got the trustees kicked off of the trust that his father meant for him. But this legal victory didn't give him possession of the mountain because, again, the trustees had sold it to Dickens on paper. So Alex now has everything his father left to him except the mountain, which Dickens has. Dickens, who sure has a company that has a lot of debt and isn't making money, but still owns the property nonetheless. The trust could only pressure Dickens by calling in his loans, but that proved difficult, as we'll see in a moment. By the time the trustees were ousted, the damage was already done. Tens of millions had been spent on fees, leaving the Hughes family fractured. And on top of all of that drama, the mountain, sure, it had a land tract now, but otherwise was still undeveloped. Because even though Dickens got the money from the trust to buy it, he took money from the trust to buy a piece of property that was in the trust. They're waiting to develop it for a potential buyer to come along, but none of the offers were good enough, so it's still just a piece of land. By 2007, Dickens' company was strapped for cash. He found an unlikely savior in Victorio Victor Noval, a man with a taste for nightlife and a checkered past. And Noval's name may not ring any bells, but in the 1990s, he was known in Beverly Hills and Miami for throwing lavish parties attended by B and C-list celebrities. In 1997, he pleaded guilty to mail fraud and tax evasion for a scheme that siphoned $60 million from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. He served 3 years in federal prison and emerged eager to rebuild his fortune and social standing. Noval boasted connections to real estate investors and would later back Hollywood films. He also possessed an uncanny ability to integrate himself with people of power and money. Well, when Dickens met Noval, he was impressed by his bravado and his connections. Noval claimed that he could bring in Middle Eastern investors ready to pay any price. So together, the two of them formed a partnership. Naval invested in Dickens' company, Tower Park Properties, and became a majority shareholder along with Dickens. In exchange, Naval got partial control of the mountain and the glamour of being associated with the most exclusive, undeveloped land in Beverly Hills. So they began hosting high-profile galas at the site, inviting Brad Pitt, Rihanna, Charlize Theron, Jimmy Kimmel, and Kim Kardashian. The mountaintop, still completely empty, became an event venue for the celebrity circuit. This move raised the property's profile, more people were aware of it, but it did little to solve the underlying debt. For years, Naval refused to name who his Middle Eastern backers were. He just told Dickens that he had them, and as long as the money showed up to Dickens, that was good enough. The mystery investor lent an air of intrigue and suggested unlimited capital. In 2019, court documents revealed the investor to be Sheikh Khalid al-Jarrah al-Sabah, a member of Kuwait's ruling family and the country's Minister of Defense. Khalid wired more than $163 million to Naval between 2010 and 2019. Naval used the funds to pay off interest, host parties, and market the property at insane valuations. However, to add another level of drama to this entire story, the money had questionable origins. Kuwaiti anti-corruption prosecutors later alleged that Khalid embezzled roughly $769 million from the Defense Ministry's accounts through banks in London, Lebanon, France, and you guessed it, California. The U.S. Department of Justice filed civil forfeiture cases seeking to seize the mountain and other assets purchased with the allegedly stolen funds. Khalid claimed he transferred the money to Naval for national security reasons, but investigators suspected he was laundering money through real estate. And in March of 2021, Khalid was arrested and jailed in Kuwait. So you have the property that at the beginning of all this was owned by Randall Hughes, right? And then he dies, and then it's supposed to go to his son, but not till his son's 35. So it gets handed over to the people who maintain the trust. But the trustees who are managing the trust want to make money, and they can't do that with the stuff just sitting there. So they 4D chess it to sell it to this guy with money out of the trust that they hand to the guy so he can buy it back from the trust, and then that guy starts to develop it. But in the meantime, Alex gets the rights to his trust back, so the trustees get kicked off, but now the guy who was just supposed to be the proxy middleman now owns the property, and he's got a bunch of debt. So he gets a guy who was previously in prison to show up and invest in his company so that he can get a part of it. But that guy doesn't have any money either. But he's like, oh, I know a guy in the Middle East who has money. That guy turns out to be a defense minister who has laundered nearly $1 billion, allegedly, from Kuwait. So now Kuwait and the U.S. government are seizing his assets, which include the company that he has invested in, because the guy he gave the money to is a majority owner in this property company that technically owns the land, technically is supposed to be Alex's because his dad left it to him. But because of all of this drama, the United States government and the Kuwaiti government wanted to. You know, all of this could have been solved if the trustees just sold it to that guy or sold the pieces of it at prices that make sense, or if Mark just didn't have a stupid will. However, before Khalid was arrested and all that, with Naval's investor cash, Dickens and Naval decided to make headlines. In July of 2018, they listed the mountain for $1 billion and launched a splashy marketing campaign with real estate broker Aaron Kerman. Kerman hired videographers to shoot panoramic drone footage and build a dedicated website promising an exclusive enclave with 6 buildable pads. He boasted that his team had identified 100 billionaires who could afford the property and that he knew half of them personally. The marketing budget, just the budget to set up the website and take videos of this piece of property, was at least $400,000. Imagine having a house or any piece of property that you spend $400,000 trying to sell. Not even the total cost of trying to sell it, setting up the website and getting videos to sell it. The listing, as you could imagine, drew more curiosity than offers. Tech titans Jeff Bezos and Tim Cook toured the site, and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman reportedly sent emissaries. Tabloids speculated that Tom Cruise was about to buy a lot. He even placed 3% of a $25 million purchase price in escrow before withdrawing. But none of the billionaire tourists offered anywhere near $1 billion. The only serious offer came from Scott Gillen, a Malibu-based designer and developer. Before becoming a builder, Gillen was one of the youngest stunt drivers on television and later directed commercials for car companies. During a hiatus, he bought a home in Venice, renovated it, and sold it within an hour. That success inspired him to launch Unvarnished, a company focused on high-end, architecturally distinctive homes. Gillen is known for hand-sanded beams, expensive glass walls, butterfly roof lines, and hidden gems under infinity pools. He once said that designing a house is like composing a film frame. Quote, "The picture has to be precise." In 2019, Gillen offered $400 million to buy the mountain. He planned to build a community of 15 architecturally significant houses, which was the largest creative undertaking of his career. And if we're being objective, this was probably the most financially beneficial thing that could have happened to the mountain. Sell it to a guy that builds big, expensive, lavish homes, and let him put 15 up there on prime real estate in Beverly Hills, and everyone's happy. Plus, Gillen's offer of $400 million would have completely wiped out the debt in Dickens' company and left Dickens and Oval with a profit. However, just like every other time someone has tried to buy this land, guess what? It wasn't enough money. Dickens and Oval countered at $600 million and insisted on keeping the unsold lots for themselves. Gillen walked away, later calling the counteroffer delusional. It became clear to Gillen that Dickens and Oval were more interested in headlines than deals. So in the meantime, when Dickens got the money from the people who held the trust way back when the three of them were controlling it on Alex's behalf, the money that was loaned to Dickens was taken out of the trust with interest. At the time, that was probably fine for Dickens because, again, it was a whole plan with him and the people that owned the trust. But once Alex regained ownership of the trust, now Dickens owes his interest to Alex. Or he owes it to the trust himself, but the trust is in control of Alex. You get it. So by 2019, the interest owed to the Hughes Trust had ballooned to approximately $200 million. This is where a lot of that debt Dickens and Oval had came from. Oval's new company, Secured Capital Partners, tried to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy to halt a foreclosure sale. The judge denied the petition, leaving the trust free to foreclosure. So on August 20th, 2019, at the Pomino Civic Center, about 20 people gathered for the auction. When the mountain was called for sale, the room went silent. The attorney announced that the property would go back to the trust for $100,000. The trust assumed its own debt, effectively wiping out Dickens and Oval. Because it assumed their own debt, they no longer had a connection to those who the money was lent to. So the supposed billion-dollar property returned to its originally intended owner at a price lower than many used cars. Is that not such a happy outcome for this? Mark Hughes intended the property to go to his son. All this drama happens, people get in the way, other people own it, they try to sell it to celebrities. But because they never paid back the debt, the property ended up going to auction and the trust gets it back for $100 grand. It's not quite as dramatic, but it almost reminds me of penny auctions. And I've got to be careful because sometimes I'll talk about things in the South and people will think that I'm talking about from my own experience. I don't know of a penny auctioning happening in like the last 100 years. There's stories about how around the time of the Great Depression, there were a lot of people who were losing their farms and properties and defaulting over to the bank. So when it came time to auction off the property, the whole town or community would be in league with the original owner. So the original owner would go to the auction and simply bid a penny or $1 for their own land. And because everyone wants them to get their land back, no one makes a counteroffer. So these silent auctions happen so that people can get back what was rightfully theirs. This kind of reminds me of that in some small way. Again, I'm not super familiar with these characters. I don't know Alex. I don't know that much about the trustees, but from just this interaction, this sounds like a happy ending. Now, winning the auction didn't end the battle for the mountain. In September of 2019, the guy from Kuwait who invested the money, the secret partner, Sheikh Khalid, filed a lawsuit in U.S. court claiming his $163 million investment in the mountain had been misappropriated. He sought $500 million in damages, arguing that had the property been properly developed and sold, he would have earned at least that much. Meanwhile, U.S. prosecutors moved to seize the property as part of the civil forfeiture case mentioned earlier. All this means that today, the mountain remains a barren hilltop. Despite decades of grand visions and more than $100 million spent on its infrastructure like roads, retaining walls, storm drains, fire hydrants, and thousands of trees, no house has ever been built. The site has a cobblestone drive, landscape lighting, and 6 graded paths, but there's still no structures. Potential buyers must not only be fabulously wealthy, but also willing to wait years while government liens and civil claims are resolved. Brokers admit privately that the for sale sign is largely performative at this point. No serious offers can proceed until the forfeiture case is settled. By 2020, after another decade of litigation, Alex Hughes was once again the rightful owner of the mountain, at least on paper. And as of early 2026, Alex Hughes is now 35 years old. He's now reached the age specified in the original trust documents for full inheritance. However, owning the deed, because of all the complications around it, is not the same as holding a marketable title. Because the property is still subject to federal forfeiture proceedings, Alex cannot sell or develop it. The research material for this video does not specify whether he has received the rest of the trust assets or how those funds are managed today. Likely because a lot of the details for that are probably behind closed doors, given how it went the first time. The trust likely still holds cash and investments separate from the mountain, but the core asset remains tied up in court. If the forfeiture action proceeds and the U.S. government ultimately seizes the land, it's unclear what compensation, if any, Alex would receive. Thus, even though he has reached the age when the trust was supposed to vest, the future of his inheritance still remains uncertain. As of January 2026, the legal battle continues. Courts have wrestled with whether Kuwait can be removed from the forfeiture case. One judge signaled that discovery into the property's financial transactions may reopen. These ongoing proceedings mean that any potential sale remains nearly impossible. Nowadays, real estate brokers quietly note that a prospective buyer would have to clear not just a huge asking price, but also liens, claims, and potential government seizure. So you pay like $500 million for the land, and then you have to deal with liens, claims, and one day the U.S. government just takes it because it's involved in a multinational Kuwait money laundering scheme. So, who wouldn't want to build a family there? At this stage, it's tempting to choose heroes and villains. Susan and Alex Hughes present themselves as victims of greedy trustees and manipulative developers. They argue that the trustees derailed the family's legacy and forced them into public litigation, while Conrad Klein insists he was trying to maximize the trust value and protect a child from the corrupting influence of inherited wealth. Critics of Klein, however, note that Klein drew a salary from the trust and wrestled control away from family members. Chip Dickens paints himself as an earnest entrepreneur who saw potential where others saw headaches, yet his refusal to sell suggests he was blinded by greed. Victorino Naval is an ex-con who leveraged someone else's stolen funds, if Naval knew that or not, to throw lavish parties and chase improbable deals. And what about Sheikh Khalid? Was he a victim of Naval's fraud or the architect of a scheme to launder stolen money through U.S. real estate? From a moral perspective, the mountain embodies two forms of bankruptcy, financial and ethical. All the way back in the 70s, the Shah of Iran's sister acquired it through privileges of a monarchy. Merv Griffin earned his fortune with genuine creative labor. Mark Hughes funded his purchase by selling questionable supplements and running a pyramid-like MLM. His son Alex inherited the property by birthright. The trustees sold it to an inexperienced developer. That developer then partnered with a convicted fraudster backed by a Kuwaiti politician accused of embezzling public funds. In the end, every owner was entangled in allegations of corruption or exploitation, except Merv Griffin. He was probably okay. Getting into a mansion fight with another Hollywood producer sounds sleazy, but, comparatively. The saga of the mountain isn't an isolated curiosity. It reflects broader trends in high-end real estate. Luxury properties are increasingly purchased via LLCs to conceal true ownership and facilitate capital flight. According to the National Association of Realtors, foreign buyers spent about $56 billion on U.S. homes from April 2024 to March of 2025. Nearly half of these purchases were all cash. Wealthy individuals and corporations create shell companies to hide assets and circumvent taxes. Real estate agents use billion-dollar price tags as marketing ploys, knowing full well the property will sell for much less. As hedge funds and corporations buy up single-family homes, the supply of affordable housing shrinks. Meanwhile, some cities have explored the idea of vacancy taxes on luxury properties that sit empty. None of these policies fully address the reality that U.S. real estate has become a favored vehicle for laundering money from abroad. And the true victim of that laundering is regular Americans who can no longer afford homes. I mean, when the average age of a homeowner or a first-time homeowner rises to what it is now, that's a very bad sign. The U.S. government has responded by expanding reporting requirements for high-value transactions and empowering the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network to track beneficial ownership. The Mountain case, with its mix of MLM profits, royalty cash, and embezzled Kuwaiti funds, allegedly, is a perfect example as to why such scrutiny is necessary. The story of the Mountain began with a billion-dollar price tag and ends, for now, in courtrooms. Along the way, it's introduced princesses, game show moguls, multi-level marketing tycoons, convict developers, Hollywood stars, international bankers, and U.S. prosecutors. It spanned continents, revolutions, marriages, divorces, bankruptcies, and even allegations of foreign corruption. The Mountain has hosted quite the saga, even though 4 walls have never been put on it. The property itself remains the only constant. A 157-acre patch of dirt witnessed the follies of human ambition time and time again. Perhaps the Mountain is cursed, as some half-jokingly suggest. More likely, it's a magnet for those who believe that wealth can bend reality to their will. In the end, though, the Mountain, ironically, exposes their hubris. This tale should remind us that behind every glossy real estate listing, there may lie a labyrinth of questionable ethics. Telling these stories can inspire us to push for greater transparency in property transactions, stricter oversight of trust and LLCs, and policies that prioritize the public good over private greed. As of recording, the Mountain remains in purgatory. The Hughes Trust technically owns it, but the U.S. government may seize it due to its ties to embezzled Kuwaiti funds. Alex Hughes and his mother Susan may yet profit from its sale if legal clouds clear, but they may also see the property tied up in litigation for years. Prospective buyers will need not only deep pockets, but also a team of lawyers versed in international finance, which, if they can afford the property, I'm sure they have. Meanwhile, outside of all the chaos and growing uncertainty, the lot sits quietly above Beverly Hills, its panoramic views unchanged, and its soil still unsettled by the many earth-moving plans that never came to pass. Perhaps someday a new owner will build there. Maybe it'll even be one of you with $1 billion to spare. As a Wendigoon viewer, probably not, but hey, you never know. I don't mean that to disparage any of you. I just don't think billionaires watch YouTube. I think they spend their time, I don't know, plotting this kind of thing, I guess. This is what they do. They spend all their time trying to find foreign investors to, like, embezzle land or something. For now, the Mountain stands as a monument to ambition thwarted. A cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked greed, and a reminder that sometimes the most expensive properties are empty because they contain stories too heavy to sell. Most importantly, it's an as-advertised billion-dollar piece of land that sold back to one of its originally intended owners for $100,000. It's a story too strange not to talk about, and I'm glad I got to talk about it to you all today, and hopefully you enjoyed, and I just want to say, thank you for watching. This was a story that was brought up by our content director, Randall, and I admit when I heard about it for the first time, I didn't get what all the fuss was about. But after looking through the details that research pulled up, I get it. As Alex digged up the details, I quickly saw that this is far too weird not to talk about. And I like these weird little stories like this. I like diving into these weird, corporate, for some reason always in California, stories over here on Wendigoon, and I'm glad you guys like to watch. Everyone who made this video possible will be credited in the description. Be sure to show them some love. They certainly deserve it. And all in all, I believe that should do it for now. New content every Monday at noon. But before I go, we just want to say thank you for watching. We hope that you enjoyed, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye! You know what I should do is I should get in contact with Alex, and I should be like, look, you got this place for $100,000. And I made this whole video saying that, you know, you should appreciate what you can get for this place. So I'll buy it for you from $101,000. And then he sells it to me. And then if I get to sell it for like $1 billion, that'll be an excellent investment. But then if the U.S. government seizes it from me, then I get to mark it off as a loss on my taxes. And then I get to make like 20 videos talking about how the feds stole my land and are saying Kuwait did it. And then I make that money back. So I win either way. I've got to make a phone call.